Whatever happened to the pursuit of happiness, and for that matter to the inalienable right of people, all of whom are created equal, to lives of their choosing and to freedom itself? Whatever happened to government by the people, of the people and for the people? We hear those words and think of the United States of America, specifically the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the Gettysburg Address in 1863. The Declaration of Independence was the work of men descended from those who had fled tyranny in the old world in search of a better beginning somewhere new. The Gettysburg Address was delivered by President Abraham Lincoln in the aftermath of a hellish battle of that new world's civil war, a war that challenged whether any nation dedicated to freedom and equality could long endure. It was the pertinent question in 1863, and it's pertinent now. Both realisations were the consequence of great suffering and of the prevailing certainty in human hearts that better times must lie ahead. Those words are enshrined in the context of the United States of America, but by the 18th and 19th centuries, the thinking that gave birth to them was already old. The understanding that all human beings are created equal and free is eternal. Inalienable is a word worth pausing to consider. It refers to that which cannot be given, nor taken away, nor surrendered. Inalienable rights are those we are born with. They're not given to us by any person, and they cannot be taken from us by any person. Most importantly, we cannot give away our inalienable rights, even if we want to. The sky is blue, the sea is wet, and we are born equal and free, entitled to life and the pursuit of happiness. The founding fathers of the USA declared those truths self-evident, which is a way of saying that everyone knows as much anyway, without needing to be told. And so I ask again, what has happened to the pursuit of happiness? When and by what means did the functionaries, being the elected servants of government that must only ever be by, of and for the people, find the audacity to seek to set aside their sworn responsibility to protect the inalienable rights of the people? Government exists to make it possible for free, equal people to make the most of life, and by so doing to pursue happiness, their own and that of others. When did those functionaries of government take it upon themselves to pretend they might deny people the innate freedom of the lives into which they were born and the pursuit of happiness which those lives make not just possible but necessary? Back in 2020 they had the gall to try and shut us in our homes. Such draconian steps had never been contemplated by any government flunky. Always the policy proposed in the face of disease had been about protecting the vulnerable and leaving the rest to go about our lives. And yet one glance at doom-laden computer modelling by statisticians in Imperial College London, and our public servants started drooling at the prospect of locking us down, treatment normally meted out only to unruly prisoners already in jail. A report published this month by the London-based Institute of Economic Affairs, based on real numbers from the real world rather than upon the fantasies of minor technocrats, has found lockdowns were, quote, a global policy failure of gigantic proportions. Such are the consequences of seeking to steal freedom. While Imperial College London, led by arch-fantasist Professor Neil Ferguson, had airily predicted lockdowns would save 2 million lives in the US and 400,000 in the UK, real-world numbers now make plain that that devastating, inhumane, criminally reckless policy of isolation and incarceration that upended the world and destroyed the lives of millions avoided 6,000 deaths in the whole of Europe and 4,000 in the US. Government functionaries here and in the US and around the world sought to steal our freedom and disregard our inalienable rights, and now their claimed justification for so doing has been revealed as utterly, utterly bogus. Some might say, I would say, that it was all a premeditated pack of lies, shaped not in the name of protecting health, but in the name of seizing control of society itself. The barefaced lying and hypocrisy are all around us. In April, at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, Joe Biden declared, quote, journalism is not a crime. He said he believed in the First Amendment, which is to say freedom of speech. He called for the release of US citizens wrongly detained abroad, journalists included. That was big of him, because here in Britain this week, Australian journalist Julian Assange lost his appeal against being extradited to the US for publishing classified documents in the public interest and in the best traditions of journalism. Biden says journalism is not a crime, while his agents do his bidding in seeking to seize and to pull into a dark hole from which none might escape a journalist whose journalism he plainly considers criminal. I very much doubt that Joe Biden knows that the concept of the pursuit of happiness likely travelled to the US from my homeland of Scotland. Francis Hutcheson, Professor of Moral Philosophy at Glasgow University during the Scottish Enlightenment, taught his students that, quote, that action is best which accomplishes the greatest happiness for the greatest numbers, and that worst which in like manner occasions misery. Misery, the misery of the mass of the population, has, in my opinion, been not just the inevitable consequence of the policies we've been made to endure these past 3 years, but the intention. Francis Hutcheson believed individual happiness was a benefit experienced by a person working first to increase the happiness of those around him or her. One of his students was John Witherspoon, who crossed the Atlantic to become president of Princeton University. Witherspoon was a signatory of the Declaration of Independence, and it's reasonable to think the presence of that line about the pursuit of happiness was his gift, and thanks ultimately to Hutcheson. But here, rather than happiness, government flunkies sowed the seeds of dread. The behavioural scientists of the so-called nudge units, the underhand activities of the secret squirrels of the laughably self-named 77th Brigade that spied upon dissent from the official line, all a deliberate and coordinated effort to spread anxiety and fear among the tax-paying, law-abiding people of the land. I say government exists now not to defend the right of the people to pursue happiness, but to deny those rights and so enable the enrichment and advantage of a narrow clique of the wealthiest obsessed with power. The intention at the same time is to make as many of us as possible unhappy and condemned to lesser lives. I say that that clique comprises those most fearful, those afraid of their fellow humankind. So fearful are they of our existence, they would move heaven and earth and everything in between in order to hobble our potential. When we are made to contemplate 15-minute ghettos and no cars and no air travel and no movement without digital IDs and no buying and selling without the approval of more of those government flunkies and their artificial intelligence, when we're told we will own nothing and be happy, that we should accept lives devoid of aspiration, when we're made to contemplate such nonsense, what are we supposed to think has happened to our inalienable right to freedom and to the pursuit of happiness? If you're asking me for the answers to these questions, I say we've been made victims of an attempted theft perpetrated by so-called leaders who are liars. I say they lied throughout the so-called pandemic. I say they lie about the war in Ukraine. I say they lie about the climate. I say they lied about who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And it seems to me they're lying now about who blew up the dam in Kherson in southern Ukraine. I say they're lying about the intentions behind the amendments to the WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. They're lying about all of it because lying is what liars do when they've nothing else and nothing left to lose. Except for one MP, being Andrew Bridgen of the Reclaim Party, no one in Westminster will talk about excess deaths past and present. I say this is lying by omission, which is just lying. I say we've not been run by inept people who just kept getting it wrong, rather by liars who told us to do one thing while themselves doing something else. Here and abroad, they tell the same lie at the same time, even when they know we know they're lying, because knowing they're all telling the same lie at the same time at least gives them the reassurance of solidarity in their lying. More and more people are awake to the lying. The last time I checked, 80 million people had turned to former Fox News host Tucker Carlson on his new channel on Twitter, likely in search of information no longer available from mainstream sources. In this time of lying, in this time of the attempted theft of our inalienable right to life and freedom and the pursuit of happiness, we have an important choice to make. We must decide what our values are. For 2,000 years and more, the West has been built around the belief that the highest achievement of the universe is humankind. A person raised within that tradition used to regard respect for humankind, the sanctity of humankind, and love of humankind as the highest values of all. And yet now we tolerate a version of the West in which humankind is fed food that makes humankind ill, is openly exploited by the drugs industry that keeps them ill, humankind that has freedom and bodily autonomy blatantly ignored, and that must watch war inflicted upon his fellows for no higher goal than the financial gain of the military-industrial complex. We're also watching the mutilation of children in the name of the transgender ideology, which is another lie. Most recently, we have been invited to fear so-called artificial intelligence, told it might supplant us as a species. Then there's the transhumanism that insists we're no longer fit for purpose anyway. Carbon life forms, your time is up. Make way for silicon. And so as never before, we must think about what it means to be human and choose whether we are for humankind, against humankind, or just ambivalent about our chances of continuing to exist at all. I said the thoughts that gave birth to the Declaration of Independence and the sentiments of the Gettysburg Address were ancient by the time they were built into the lower courses of the masonry supporting the United States of America. The American dream remains that, just a dream, while the stated aims of the authors of the Declaration of Independence were aspirations most high. They've never yet been realised. Among those founding fathers were slave owners, so that even those capable of conceiving of a world of equality and freedom for all men and women were nonetheless incapable of living up to their own ideals. It was ever thus. But just because a grand idea has not yet been made real doesn't mean it never can be. Now, when the future of humankind depends upon it, all possible efforts must be made to renew that noble aspiration. A document called the Declaration of Arbroath is on public display in Scotland now. It was written in 1320 and, among other bold pronouncements, declares that while King Robert, the Bruce, had done a grand job, still made plain that if he failed the people, failed to defend their freedoms, those same people would do whatever necessary to be rid of him and to find someone better. Here's the thing. Freedom is ours by right, and the pursuit of happiness is ours by right. We've always known as much, in our hearts at least. It was and is, declares the Declaration of Arbroath, not for glory, nor for riches, nor honours that we're fighting, but for freedom alone, which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. That much was true in 1320. It was true in 1776. It's true now. It will always be true.